So I'm going to introduce Professor Gerry Beyer. Now, he has been researching pet trust for over 20 years. So this is something, an area that he is known for being having a lot of expertise in. And it was a fringe thing 20 years ago. Not as many people had heard of it or done much with it before. So he's really a pioneer in this area and has a lot of expertise. So again, we are just so very happy to have him here to do this talk. And without further ado, take it away, Gerry.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And I want to thank, first of all, Michelle for that really overly kind introduction. And I'm just very honored to be invited to be with you today to talk about planning for the future of your non-human family member. And of course, predominantly for us, it's going to be parrots and other types of birds. But of course, the same logic would apply to other pets you might have: dogs, cats, monkeys, whatever. All right, now let's see here. I want to make sure I'm sharing my screen properly with you. So hopefully if I do this, you'll now see my slide on the screen. All right, so I'm going to start off and I'm going to ask you a question. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to grade you. I mean, I know I'm a professor and I like to do that, but nope, not going to grade you. But here is the question I'm going to ask you. What freedoms are protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution? Now, I put them up there on the screen for you: speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition for redress. Now, when this survey was done a few years ago, only 25% of the respondents could name more than one. But the interesting thing is, what did 20% say? And I know you're going to find this hard to believe. I certainly did. But 20% said that the right to own a pet animal was one of the freedoms protected by the First Amendment. Now, that certainly shows how very important people consider their pets. It also shows a deficiency in basic civics. But that's not why we're looking at it. All right, take a look at this. We have over 70 million United States households. Now, I don't know, I saw that some of you are from Canada, some of you are from Mexico. There may be statistics there as well. But in the United States, about 65% of all households own a pet. Dogs, of course, number one at 63.4 million. Then come cats at 42.7, fish at 11.1, and then birds come in at about 6 million. And now the first thing I want to do is find out, do you have a pet other than a bird? So chat in yes if you have a pet animal other than a bird. Look at that. We have people who have cats, we have people who have dogs, 5 cats and a bird. That could be kind of interesting. And a horse. Okay, rabbits, house rabbits. How cool is that? All right, 19 cats Sunny has. All right. So the talk we're going to have, although we are primarily looking at this from the perspective of birds, everything that we're talking about should apply to the planning for your other pet animals as well. But I'm going to be pointing out as we go along some of the special things that you have to take into account for bird planning that you would not for your typical cat or dog. Now, why do so many people have pets? Well, look at all the things pets can do for you. They can give you unconditional love, companionship. That's been especially important during COVID when people are housebound. It can lower blood pressure. It can lessen the risk of heart disease. It can improve concentration and mental attitude. Perhaps some of our politicians need more pets. It will shorten recovery time after hospitalization. So there are tremendous benefits to pet ownership. And take a look at the way that pets are treated in society. People will make very important decisions based upon their pets. They'll decide where to live, where to go on vacation if an animal can't come with the family. 20% of Americans in a recent survey said that they have altered romantic relationships because of pet disputes. No, I'm not going to ask you if that's happened to you. 80% of people say that they brag about their pets. 79% of pet owners say they sleep with their pets. Now, I don't know if any of you sleep with your birds. That I don't know. But in general, the 79% is probably greater than most people sleep with their own spouse. They'll take off work to be with a sick pet. For some animals, they've had kidney transplant and teeth whitening and braces. And for mammals, one of the newest businesses is to provide, how can I say this gently, replacement equipment for male dogs, especially who have been neutered, because they fear that it will help them retain their self-esteem and their prestige with their other dog playmates. All right, people will buy presents for their pets for birthdays and for holidays. And so from this, you can see that people are really going to care about their pet animals. So since you care, what are you going to do if you can't take care of your other pet? Maybe you are unavailable, short-term for some reason. What if you are disabled, again, either temporarily or for a long term? Or what upon death? What do you want to have happen? I'm sure you all want something to happen like you can see on the left picture, where you find someone who will give your bird or other pet love and attention and a good home. But if you do not plan, you're going to end up more like the picture on the right. Your animal may not survive, or if he or she survives, it may not survive well. Therefore, planning is needed. You don't want to leave any of this to chance. Planning is necessary. So with that in mind, we're now going to start by looking at an overview of the different steps you should take, and then we'll go through and look at each of these steps in more detail. Before I go on, I want to point out the chat message that Michelle just posted. There is an article that I prepared with emphasis on pets, and in there are details of everything I'm talking about, even some sample forms you can take to your lawyer, a chart of the pet trust statutes in all the states. So this article can be a nice resource for you to get additional information as well. All right, let's start now with an overview of what we're going to do. There are three situations that you want to talk about. First, if you are unavailable for the short term. In that situation, you'd want an animal card, an animal document or notebook, and a door sign. Then we have to look at disability long-term, where we need to talk about your durable financial power of attorney. And then when you cease to function as a carbon-based biological unit, then we need to talk about what happens upon death, and that is the pet trust. Now, as Michelle told you originally, if you have some detailed kind of questions about things, we're going to save those to the end when we have our Q&A. But as we go through, if I start talking about something and you don't understand a term that I use, or I'm not clear about something, please chat in and ask me, because I'll be glad to do that. I know that I'm talking to a primarily lay audience, and I don't want to drift into like I'm talking to lawyers or my students and start talking about things that you're not following. So don't hesitate to chat in a question, because If you have a question, the odds are very strong that your colleagues will as well. All right. So with that in mind, we're going to start now with short-term care planning. It is very important to provide protection for the animal's short-term care because, for example, you could end up with a severe case of COVID and be hospitalized. You could have a heart attack. You could be in a car accident on the way home. All these types of things could happen. And if people don't know that there is a pet in your home or apartment that needs to be taken care of, they might starve or otherwise suffer a great deal before they are actually found. So you need to be sure that you have short-term planning in mind. There have even been cases where after the pet owner passed away, the family members didn't know what to do with the pets. They took the pets to a shelter or a pound, and unfortunately, they weren't like no-kill organizations. And the pet was actually euthanized before they read the will that said, oh, we're leaving this money to take care of the animal, and this is where the animal goes. And it was just too late. All right. So we're now going to look at the techniques you want to do for short-term planning. Technique number one is the animal card. This is a card that you want to carry in your wallet so that people will know you have a pet at home, so that the police, emergency care workers, the EMS folks, people at a hospital, whatever, would find this card and then realize that there are pets in your home. Now, on the screen right now, you're looking at the front of the card the Humane Society provides. It says, you've got these many pets, and that name, animal. And then if you look at the back of the card, it has the name of the emergency pet caregivers and even the name of a pet sitter or veterinarian or to call. Now, some people are chatting in and saying, keep it with your driver's license. Absolutely. The card is actually the same size as a driver's license. Now, if you go to the article that I provided to you, there is also a link to a card that is provided by the ASPCA. And the card, actually, if you click on the link in my article, it will come out in wallet size form. And all you have to do is fill it out and print it. And then you'll have the card. And you might even want to laminate it so it doesn't get kind of messed up sitting in your wallet. But I would keep that right behind your driver's license. And again, this isn't just for pets. I mean, for parents, this is for any kind of pet that you might have, because nothing would be worse than something happening to you and the pet not being taken care of. In emergency situations, you hear a lot of stories about this. There was a tremendous amount in New York City after 9/11. There's a lot after earthquakes, fires, floods, etc. So absolutely carry an animal card. All right. The next thing you want to do is have what we call an animal document or a more sophisticated notebook, something that you keep at home where someone coming in to take care of the animal would find it. I often say keep it in food because they'll find it when they go to feed your animal. And this is where you can provide all sorts of detailed information. You can have veterinarian information, medical information. I bet some of you, do you give parrots medicine? Chat on in. Do you give your parrots medicine? Do they take drugs? Oh yeah, people are saying yes, they do. All right. So you would definitely want a person who comes in to take care of your pet to know what kind of medicine that the pet might need. So you'd have all this information. Now, in your materials, I have reproduced for you a sample form from the Humane Society, which you can print out and use. or you can create any kind of thing that you want. I've seen people just have a scrap of paper that they've scribbled down stuff on it. And I've also seen notebooks. Oh, look at this. Tina says you have one of the notebooks. Yes, and it's very important to keep it updated. Absolutely. Excellent point, Tina. So this type of notebook would be very helpful for explaining everything. It would be what you would want someone to know so they could take care of your pet, whatever kind of animal it is. Okay, so everybody straight so far. We've got the animal card in your wallet, the animal document or notebook at home. But there's something else that's very important, and that is a door sign. A door sign. You need something on the door of your house or apartment to let people know that there are pets inside, whether they're birds or cats or dogs or whatever it is you might have, because people are going to be in emergency situations entering your place unexpectedly. So they could be police, they could be firefighters, inspectors, even meter readers, family members, all these type of people might be coming in. Now, some people say they worry about pet theft, letting them know that there's pets in the place. Well, of course, that's a risk, but I think they'd be more concerned about taking your television, computer, and jewelry, and perhaps a good security system would be a good thing. Right, someone said, put it on the outside and more details on the inside. That is good too. And this is very important because depending upon what kind of pet you have, you don't know what they're going to do when someone comes inside. Now, this is less likely with birds, because I'll bet you that unless you are home, your birds are in a cage, right? Maybe when you're home, you let them out, but if you're not home, they're probably caged. But think about other animals. Some animals, as soon as you open the door, what do? They run away. They escape. But now the animal is gone. Dogs have a tendency to do that. On the other hand, some animals will hide, and a person will come in and look around and say, there's no pets here, like cats. Cats do that. They'll hide and you won't know they're there. So this way they'll know to be careful when they open the door, that the pets don't run away, and they'll know to have eyes on to look for the pets that are there. And like I said, in the materials, I have a little sample, a picture like what you see on the screen that you could cut out and use, or contact the Humane Society and maybe they will supply that for you. All right, so those are the immediate things you want to do for a short-term situation where you cannot come back to home. So that would be the door sign we just looked at, the animal card, and the animal document or notebook. Now let's assume that you are disabled for a longer period of time. This could be because of an accident. It could be because of COVID. It could be a medical reason like a heart attack or a stroke, or you simply broke a leg. It could be for any reason where for a prolonged period of time, you are not going to be able to handle your financial situation. I'm just going to ask you now, in general, how many of you have some sort of durable financial power of attorney? Chat on in a yes if you have one. I do, yes. Working on one now, good. Now, without regard, now, some of you said you don't. Well, you need one. I don't care whether it's for the pets or anything else. The last thing you want is not to have someone lined up to make your financial decisions when you can't. Because if you don't, then the people are going to have to go to court, prove you're incompetent, get a guardian or conservator appointed, which is someone you will not have any control over or who it is. And it's going to be very expensive, time consuming, and intent defeating. So it is very important, even if this lecture had nothing to do with pets, I would be advocating that you have a durable financial power of attorney. Now, and look, Mary says, I have no money. That does not matter. You still need someone to be able to pay the bill to take care of animals or whatever it is, not having much money, definitely not a reason for not having a financial power of attorney. Now, if you have pets and you have a financial power of attorney or you're getting one, it is very important that the pets be specifically dealt with in that financial power of attorney. So when you, yes, you can do it on your own, better off to have a lawyer help you, but you want to be sure that there are provisions in there dealing with the pet animal. You want to be sure that your agent, now remember, in a durable power of attorney, you're called the principal. The person who creates it, that would be you, is the principal. The other person is the agent. Now, I know they call them power of attorney, but attorney here has nothing to do with being a lawyer or practicing law. It's just an agent. It's kind of deceptive that they still use that old-fashioned term to refer to it because a lot of people get confused. But all we're talking about is naming someone who can handle your financial affairs. And in the power of attorney, they need to be authorized to spend money for the pet's care, because other people, perhaps children who aren't so happy about your extravagant expenditures for your pet, could come in and say it is a breach of your agent's fiduciary duties, their very high standard of care, to be spending money on some pet rather than saving the money for you. So you want to be sure that the agent is authorized to spend money for the pet's care. And I think it's a good idea to give the agent the authority to place the pet with a caregiver and pay for the caregiver's expenses, because that agent probably doesn't want to take your pets, and take them to the agent's house to take care of them, but they may need to be placed with a caregiver of some sort. And so authorize the agent to place the pet with a caregiver, and if necessary, pay the caregiver's expenses or maybe even a fee. So for your longer term disability, be sure that you've dealt with your pets in the financial power of attorney. So now we've dealt with short-term unavailability, longer-term unavailability, and now we're going to talk about permanent unavailability, that is, being deceased. So you need, if you want to take care of your pet, to create some sort of pet trust arrangement. Now, there are two basic types of pet trusts. The first type is called the traditional pet trust. You can do this in any state. I'm pretty sure in Canada it'll work. Mexico, I'm not as familiar with Mexican trust laws because they're based on civil law rather than the common law like Canada. And what you do with this type of arrangement is that the caregiver, the beneficiary, receives funds to take care of the pet in accordance with the pet owner's directions. This is a very comprehensive plan. For those of you that have children, especially if you have minor children, you may have set up a trust to take care of your children. This would be a very similar arrangement to take care of your pet. It is sort of, I call it the gold standard of pet planning. It is the absolute best choice, and it is the choice that we're going to spend a considerable amount of time studying today. But there is another type of pet trust. Now, the traditional pet trust has been something that's been around like forever. But as Michelle told you, planning for pets in general is a relatively recent thing. When I started doing this research about 20 years ago, it was a quite unheard of thing. And in fact, when I would tell my fellow lawyers about it, they kind of would laugh at me and say it was some ridiculous thing to plan for pets like this. Things have changed. I am now asked many times to give presentations for lawyers about how to do pet protection. All right, the second method is called the statutory pet trust. Now, this is not so good, but it is way better than nothing. This is where states have changed. This was only authorized in a handful of states 20 years ago. Now, every state in the country and Washington, D.C. too, have express statutes authorizing it. The benefit is it's very simple and very inexpensive, but it doesn't provide all the details that you need. The law fills in all the gaps. It's sort of like making a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act gift for children. Yes, it's way better than making no plans for your pet, but it is not really the method I would recommend. Now, how do these statutory pet trusts work? Well, the reason I say it's so simple is all you do is put a provision in your will that says, I leave a certain amount of money or certain property in trust to care for my bird Polly. And that's it. No other details are needed. State law is going to provide all the rest of the details, but not you. It's not going to carry out your intent because you haven't stated it. It's just going to be better than nothing because it's very simple, very inexpensive. It doesn't require much effort. And like I said, this is better than nothing. And I am thrilled that all states allow this, but it would not be the method I would recommend for someone who really wants to take care of their pet. So what we now need to do is look in detail at the best option, and that is the traditional pet trust. Now let's look at the big picture first. The big picture is that you, the pet owner, will become what we call a settlor. A settlor. A settlor is the name for a person who creates the trust. You create the trust by transferring your pet. Because remember, under our legal system, animals are just property. So you have to transfer your pet and money or other property to a trustee who will then manage that property. And then you name a beneficiary to receive the payments. Now, the beneficiary is actually the caregiver. It's the caregiver. And the caregiver is the same person as the beneficiary. And they will get money from the trust conditioned on taking care of the pet according to your instructions. And the trustee monitors this so that if the pet isn't being taken care of properly, the trustee comes in and takes the pet away and gives it to a different caregiver. So you have monitoring going on. Since you will not be there to monitor how the pet is taken care of, you have the trustee doing that. So that is the overview of a traditional pet trust. Let's go look at this again to be sure we're all on the same page. You are a settlor. You create the trust, transferring your pet and property to a trustee who is then going to manage that money for the benefit of the pet. You name a beneficiary who is going to get possession but not ownership of the pet, and they receive money conditioned on taking care of the pet animal according to your instructions. Now, you're all thinking, yeah, this is what I want to do because this is the best way of taking care of my pet. Now, how are you going to do this? Should you create a pet trust on your own? Well, obviously, our legal system allows you to do that, but I would definitely not recommend doing self-help techniques. I mean, you can also, remove your own gallbladder or appendix if it's causing trouble. Nothing's going to stop you from reading some self-help stuff on the internet, getting a knife, a little bit of anesthetic, cutting in there, getting that stuff out, sewing it back up. Yeah, you can do it, but it's not wise. Same thing is for doing this yourself. It is not a smart thing to do. You know what lawyers call people who prepare their own wills and trusts? We call them job security, because the more people that do that, the more we have to do to fix it later on. So you want to get to a lawyer to help you with this. Now, you just don't want to pick any old lawyer. You need a lawyer who is an expert in estate planning. And it's not just enough to get a lawyer who's an expert in estate planning. You need someone with pet trust experience so that they know what to do, and you don't end up paying them to learn something that a pet trust attorney who knows how to do this would be able to do very easily. Now, how do you go about finding one of these people? Well, go to your state bar's website, whatever state you're in, and look for attorneys who are certified in estate planning. That's a good place to start looking. You can also do an internet search and look for pet trust lawyer in your state. And you'll find people who advertise that because they have experience. You can also go, if you want to get the best possible, go to the website of the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel, actec.org, actec.org, and look for an estate planner in your particular city. These are the folks that will be able to give you the best advice, take care of this for you. Yes, you're going to have to pay, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a lot. Adding a pet trust to your estate, if you have an attorney who's done it before, is not a very difficult thing. And also in your materials, I've provided, now don't do it yourself, but you can take that article to your lawyer because there's sample language in there that he or she might be able to use or adopt to create the pet trust for you. Now, the way to save a lot of money when you go see a lawyer about creating a pet trust is that you already know what you want. So you don't have to spend a whole bunch of time listening to the lawyer ask you all these dozen questions, and then you thinking about what you want. So what we're going to do now is go through all the things that you need to think about before you create a pet trust, so that when you go to your lawyer to do it, you're already good to go. That'll save you buku of money because you'll already know what you want, and you can cut down those interview times tremendously. So we're going to look at over a dozen different things that you need to think about when you want to create pet trust. All right? Are we ready to go? Hopefully you're saying yes. I'm going to have a drink. Only water. It's only where I'm at. I'm physically right now in Tucson, Arizona. So it's only 10:39 in the morning. All right. So let's now start looking at the different factors to consider. Number one, when do you want to create it? There are two possible times to create a pet trust. It's either while you're alive or when you die. Now, let's take a look at the time of creation, starting first with creating while you're alive. We're going to look at the pros and cons of creating it while you're alive. The biggest benefit is there'll be no delay or gap in the pet's care. So there'll be protection during time of disability. In other words, no gap, because the trust is already operational. It's already functioning. It's already ongoing. So there's no delay. Now, the downside is that this is going to have greater cost because you have to create it now. There's going to be more hassle and cost creating it while you're alive. But the big benefit is you're not going to have the gaps, the delays, and it's going to provide much greater protection for the pet. And if you create one of these pet trusts while you're alive, you can keep it revocable. So you can change your mind anytime you want, get all the money back, terminate the arrangement, change any of the terms. This is not like a one and done situation. You can keep it revocable, which I'd recommend that you do. And then you can make any changes you want, change the terms, change the beneficiary, change what pets are covered, or say, man, I don't want this anymore, revoke the whole thing. So you can create it while alive. We call that an inter vivos, or some of you may have heard the term a living trust, an inter vivos or living trust. And if you already have a trust created perhaps for children, You could create a separate part of that trust to take care of the pet, or you could have the pet trust separately. And it would just depend on the facts of your particular case, whether it's better to have it separate or all in one. Now, the second point in time that you can create the pet trust is by including it in your will. We call it a testamentary pet trust. You create it in your will, so it doesn't take effect until you die, but it does require the probate of your will. And that could cause a potentially lengthy gap in the pet's care. Now, whether or not probate is fast and simple or lengthy and complex depends a tremendous amount on what state that you're in. Just as an example, my state is Texas. Our probate system is fast, simple, and cheap. Some of you might be from California or New York. Their probate systems are complex, expensive, and time-consuming. So you have to look to see how long that'll take. But even in the fast state like Texas, it's going to be weeks or months before you actually get the will probated. And this will not provide any protection during times of disability. No protection during times of disability because it doesn't take effect until you die. The big benefit, though, is that it's a de minimis lifetime expense. I mean, other than the fact of putting the provisions in your will, there is no additional expense. And some of you have chatted that they have lawyers that charge $300 or $100 or more even an hour. But to create terms of a pet trust, once you've done it and you tell them what you need to know based upon what we've talked about, it's not going to take very much time for them to do it. All right, so this is a very important and the first decision you need to make. Do you want to have it take effect right now, despite the extra cost and expense to get the enhanced protection for your pet? Or do you want to just put it in your will and save the money, still take care of the pet, but end up with that risk between the time of death and the time it's probated and during times of disability? So I would always say that if you have the financial ability to do so, create it now. But if you don't, it's much better to have it in your will than to not have any planning at all. All right. The next thing you want to think about, and it is perhaps the absolute most important, is to designate the caregiver beneficiary. This is very important. You just can't go picking somebody. It needs to be something that you spend a lot of time and thought about. You got to interview that caregiver beneficiary. You have to make sure that that person is going to be willing to assume all the responsibilities that are associated with your pet. You want to be sure that they can provide your pet with a stable home. And you really should, test the animal in the person's household. You have to make sure that they will get along with the person you've named, that person's spouse or partner, the children, the other pets. I mean, some of you have indicated you've got cats and birds in the same house. Natural predator with natural prey together in the house. Maybe they get along in your house, but maybe in another house that won't so well. Or especially for people who have cats and dogs, there's allergies. Maybe the family members or kids have allergies. You don't know. So you want to be sure that the pet and the prospective caregiver, that is the beneficiary of the trust, quality time together to make sure they can get along. And you want to name alternates because the person that you pick first might they could die or something could happen to them. So you need to have at least one and preferably two successors figured out who would do it if the first ones can't. And whatever you do, don't the trustee, don't name the person that you're giving the money and the animal to, because then there's no checks and balances. The whole idea is to have the trustee over here, the caregiver and beneficiary over here, so that the trustee constantly monitors the caregiver to make sure your animal is getting the proper care. Now, one thing you might want to consider doing, especially if you have a long-lived bird who could live, maybe 100 years, is to create some sort of a panel or a method of selecting alternate caregivers. You could appoint maybe a veterinarian or family members or whatever to be on a panel so that they could select the next caregiver, because sometimes it can be hard to get succession of caregivers. And what we need to talk about now is that, now, Laura, yes, indeed, we're going to talk about getting the trustee compensation later on. Very, very good. And the rest of you have some good things. We're going to be covering those shortly. All right. Now, in addition to this, you have to think about the special considerations with a parrot that don't necessarily extend to more traditional animals, such as cats and dogs. Parrots make noise. They make a horrid racket. Now, you don't probably think it's horrid, but people who don't like birds would think it's horrid. And so there's people who live in small apartments, they might not be able to handle a parrot, or live in a very close community. They may not allow it. Look, this Felicia says it would be very impossible or very challenging. That's right. Parrots are messy. They throw stuff around. They're messy. And people may not want that mess in their house. Many parrot owners want their birds to have free flight opportunities, right? You want your bird to be able to fly free. How many of you, I'm just curious, how many of you allow your birds to fly free in your house? Anybody? How many of you let them fly free? Yes, look at the people chatting in. I see lots of people saying yes. In fact, I actually know someone that actually built an atrium in their house, like 20 foot tall, just so they could have their birds have free flight opportunities. So you may want the caregiver to be able to do that. And then you need succession planning due to the long life of parrots. If you have a younger parrot, the parrot, might live 90 more years, which means they're going to outlive anybody you name as a caregiver, right? So you need to have a long succession planning if you want that animal, that bird, to be taken care of. The same thing is true for like people who have tortoises. They have long life expectancies as well. So you need to be able to plan for these people who have long life expectancies, because you could end up with difficulties there. And it's always a good idea to have some remote final option to have an organization. And I don't mind putting in a little plug for Phoenix Landing. It might be a good idea to have an organization such as them available to handle the animal in case all of your other options are unavailable. As Michelle said, you guys already have several birds whose owners have passed away that you're looking to rehome. And so that is a good. Now, I didn't mean, now, Lori, I didn't say last resort as like that's the worst place. I meant that if you cannot have someone that you've named and interviewed and everything, that's what I mean by last. I don't mean last as being the poor choice. All right. All right. So think about all these extra considerations that you need to have with a parent when you designate the caregiver and the succession of caregivers. We now move on to our next one, and that is the trustee, who is going to be in charge of monitoring everything and managing all the property. So you need a trustee, and there's a lot of decisions that go into picking a proper trustee. Now, do you want an individual to do it? Now, you could name a family member or friend to do it. Well, do they have the skills to be a trustee? I mean, if someone asks you to be a trustee, do you know what my normal advice is? My normal advice is that if someone asks you to be a trustee, you should follow the cocaine rule. What is the cocaine rule? Just say no. Because being a trustee is a huge responsibility and a huge exposure to liability. So although you can name family members and friends as the trustee, and they may do it out of love and affection, you may want a professional, and you want someone who does this as a job. They'll have the skills necessary to manage property, to do the reports that are necessary, etc. Now, it's true, you're probably going to have to pay them. Yeah, you're going to have to pay a corporate trustee. But if you have enough money that you are transferring to the trust, the benefits of a corporate trustee outweigh the disadvantages. Now, some of you are saying, well, what's the value of the property that would make a corporate trustee more valuable from a financial point of view? That varies. Probably 50,000 to 100,000 makes a corporate trustee that the cost is worth the, you're going to get more benefit than out of it than the fee you're going to have to charge. So that's something you want to think about. Of course, compensation is important. We've already talked about that. And you want to name alternatives, because the first trustee might die, resign, or not want the job. So it's very important to pick a trustee. Now, if you're creating the trust while you're alive, it's obvious you have talked with the trustee right now and they know what's going on. But if you're naming the trustee in a pet trust in a will, be sure you check with that person first. Make sure that that person or corporation or professional trustee is going to be willing to do this. I have even heard that there are in some areas, that there are actually people who hold themselves out as being professional trustees with a specialization in pet trusts, so that they are actually trustees who are really skilled at handling pet trust arrangements. All right, so that's taking care of the trustee. So now we've gotten the parties involved, right? Number one, you've created the trust while alive or in your will. You are the settlor of the inter vivos or testamentary pet trust. We have a beneficiary who is the caregiver, and we have the trustee who manages the money. Now let's look at the other factors. Well, we have to get the animal to the trust, because as I said earlier, your pets are actually property. I know that's sad, but our legal system treats them as property. So if it's an inter vivos pet trust, you have to deliver the animal to the trust along with the proper ownership documents. Now, if it's an inter vivos trust and you still are the person who's going to be the caregiver, you don't really have to do that. Theoretically, it goes to the trustee and then back to you. And if it's a testamentary trust, then you have to have a provision in the will that specifically leaves the pet to the trustee of the trust in trust. You need to make an actual gift of that animal, because otherwise, if you don't make a specific gift of the animal to the pet trust, it'll just be covered like by the residual clause of your will, and who knows where it will go. So you need to provide an express provision that leaves the pet to the pet trust. And then the trust will provide that the trustee is to deliver custody of the animal, not ownership, but custody of the animal to the caregiver, to the beneficiary. Now, in addition to transferring the animal, you need to transfer other property to the trust to take care of the animal. Now, there are a tremendous amount of factors that you need to take into account in determining how much money or other property to put into the trust for the animal. You have to look at the type of animal. In other words, a parrot who's going to live 90 years needs a lot more money than a gerbil who's only going to live a few years. So you have to look at life expectancy. You have to look at the potential for expensive medical costs. I mean, I believe that veterinarian care for parrots is on the expensive side. So you need to have funds for that. You have to have the fee to take care of the trustee. Fee for the trustee. Fee to take care of the caregiver. You have to have liability insurance in case the pet causes injuries, right? If you're, a parrot could bite somebody. If you have a dog and it's a pit bull, they could mangle somebody. I mean, you have all those kind of risks. Maybe you want health insurance for the pet. The person who's taking care of the pet's probably going to go on vacation or maybe become ill. So they may need to account for pet sitter costs, and you look at the size of the estate. All right, Jamie, I am sorry. I know that many pit bulls are wonderful animals. However, despite that, homeowners, if you have a pit bull, your homeowner insurance is likely to be higher than someone who doesn't own a dog or who owns less dangerous animals. So it is a factor when you decide how much money to leave to the pet trust, whether there is going to be these enhanced expenses based upon the type of animal. All right. Now, one of the things some of you had mentioned earlier is I don't have much money. Well, there are ways to handle that. Now, before I do that, though, I forgot I needed to give you a warning. You don't want to leave too much property to a pet. You don't want to leave millions and millions of dollars. If you, well, maybe, hopefully you have millions and millions of dollars that you can leave. But you do not want to leave an unreasonably large of money to a pet trust, because if you leave too much money, your heirs, beneficiaries, family members, they got a big incentive to contest. They're going to go to court and say, I'm certainly more needy than taking care of a parrot or a cat. And so they're going to give them an incentive to contest. And the law of almost all states permits the court to reduce the amount of a pet trust to what it considers to be a reasonable amount. So even though you may have left a lot of money to the pet trust, if it's too much, your heirs or beneficiaries can go to court and say, that's an unreasonably large amount. So you want to be sure that that amount is carefully determined. Now, the next thing you want to look at is where are you going to get this money from? Well, if you have enough money while you're alive or deceased, you can have direct transfers. I mean, if it's an inter vivos trust, you could transfer the money right now. If you're doing it in a will, you can leave it in the will. But many people do not have sufficient money to fund a pet trust, especially for a long-lived animal such as a parrot. What do? Well, there's a way of creating money when you die. For example, life insurance. I bet many of you have life insurance on your life that's worth a lot of money. In other words, you're worth more dead than you are alive. Well, name the pet trust as the beneficiary of some of your life insurance. So maybe you have a life insurance policy for several $100,000. Right now, you don't have much money. You're living paycheck to paycheck. But when you die, the life insurance kicks in. Well, a part of that could go to fund the pet trust. And you could name the pet trust as a beneficiary of other assets in whole or in part, retirement plans, IRAs, 401ks, pay on death bank accounts. So even if you do not have much money, as some of you chatted in earlier, you still have the ability to leave money to the pet trust. Life insurance is probably one of the best ways of doing that. So is naming as a beneficiary of retirement plans and other similar arrangements. And remember, it doesn't have to be all of it. You could segregate out a certain amount of money or a certain percentage of all of these types of policies and have that go to fund the pet trust. Another thing you need to think about is what is the approach that this money is going to be used as. There are two basic ways we could do it. One is called the endowment approach. This is where you don't intend the trustee to use any of the money or property that you have put into the trust for the animal except as a last resort. Instead, it's supposed to earn money, income, and then that income is used. So it's like endowing a professorship at a university or endowing a park or whatever. You put the money there, it earns interest, income, rent, whatever. That's what used to take care of the parrot. They only invade the property, the principal, if it is needed. Now, that works great if you have enough money. And it is, of course, the better approach for long-lived animals because the money will get used up otherwise. And remember, for a parrot, you might need to be supplying money for 50, 75 or more years. So the endowment approach allows things to take into account of inflation, earn money, and so forth. Now, if you don't have the funds to do that, or you're not planning for a long-lived bird, I mean, some of you have, I'm not quite sure what the lifespan of a parakeet is, but I think it's significantly shorter than that of parrots and macaws and so on. So you could just transfer the money and then the trust income, you use the income and you use the principal to support the bird. Of course, each time money is used, there's less and less for the future. So eventually it will all get used up. But if you don't have as much money, that is what to do. Now, Scott asked a very good question I want to answer now. Can pets be named as beneficiaries? No. A pet is a piece of property. It would be like saying, I'm going to name my cell phone as the beneficiary of my will. You can't do it. The trust is the beneficiary. And you can name in every state the trust as a beneficiary. There'll be a separate line to designate the trust. If it's an inter vivos trust, it will have an EIN, the tax number that trusts have. It will have a number while you're alive that you can use. If it's a testamentary trust, you won't get an EIN, a tax number until after death. You can still name the trust as a beneficiary. You fill it in not as the person part of the form, but as the a trust part of the beneficiary designation. All right, so you can fund the trust using either this endowment approach or the spend down approach. It's kind of interesting. I wanted to tell you this a minute ago. We were talking about the excessive use. Hey, I see some birds right out the window now. They're not parrots. They're huge hawks. They're probably natural enemies of parrots, but there's two big hawks flying around. All right. Sorry, didn't mean to get the squirrel on you there. All right. With regard to the excessive spending of money, there's a very famous case where the caregiver wanted money from the trust for two things. They wanted money for a washing machine to wash the dog's bed clothing, and they wanted money to buy a car because the dog liked to take rides and also be more reliable transportation to the veterinarian. The court said that money for the washing machine was a legitimate expense, but buying a car for the dog to go on rides or go to the vet was not considered a legitimate expense for the trust. All right. Getting away from money now, the next thing you want to do is describe the pet's standard of living. You want to describe how you want that pet taken care of. Food, diet, hey, routines. Do any of you have little routines with the birds? You know, you go like this when you feed them, then you do this, and you got little routines. Do you do that sort of thing with birds? I'm looking. Chat on in. I don't see anything. Anybody there? Yes. Yeah, you've got routine. You do crazy dances. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, that was one of the most fascinating things I learned about parrots. And that is someone typed in that they go to bed at 7 and get up at 7. And that's because parrots live near the equator, basically, and their biological rhythms are used to more like 12-hour days. And the farther north you go, like if you live up in Canada or somewhere where the days can be 20 hours long, during the summer and only like, a couple of hours long during the winter, that can really mess up a parrot's biological clock. Anyways, that's for other people do lectures like that. I just found that fascinating because I never thought about that before until I did parrot research. All right. So a lot of you have these routines, and it probably is very reassuring to the bird to have those routines. I bet you got toys and cages and grooming and socialization and whether you breed them and medical care like preferred veterinarians and so on. And so you want all these instructions. Now, it might get excessive writing all of this out in the pet trust, but you could refer to something that the trustee could show to the caregiver beneficiary. Maybe make a video. I like that. Make a video and show them what the kind of things you do and so on, because that will help the trustee know whether or not the caregiver is providing proper care. Because remember, during these times, you're not around. Either you are disabled, if you created while alive, or you are deceased. You're not around to provide any of these instructions. So if you don't provide the instructions and information and so on, there's no one that's going to be able to do it. So it may get a little excessive to describe all these details about the pet's standard of living in the trust itself. But you certainly can write in the trust, I will leave a video or I will leave a bunch of written instructions and keep them separate. And then the trustee and caregiver can then see them. Next thing, got to specify the distribution for the to take care of the pet. I mean, how are you going to do that? And there are many different methods. Let's look at some of the primary ways that you can do this. You could say the beneficiary gets a fixed sum of money every month for taking care of the animal. Well, that certainly is simple, but it doesn't account for any change in circumstances. Maybe a fixed sum and give the trustee discretion to pay additional expenses. Or maybe you work on an expense reimbursement model only. Every month, the caregiver gives the receipts to the trustee for food, toys, medical care, whatever, and then gets reimbursed. I like that. That's a little bit more work, but that's very fair. So expense reimbursement. So the beneficiary caregiver gets all the expenses reimbursed for taking care of the pet. Now, the next thing you have to ask then is whether or not they should get something more. Should they get more than just their expenses reimbursed? If you give them a little extra money, that could increase the quality of care because they may think, well, yeah, it's worth my hassle taking care of the bird because I'm getting a little extra money. But on the other hand, if you pay the caregiver more than expenses, it's going to decrease the amount available in the future to take care of the pet. So you have to think about the type of pet, the type of care, and how much money you have of whether or not the trustee should give additional distributions. And of course, many of you are saying, well, I'm not going to know. I'm not going to know now what the situation will be later. Then you leave it to the trustee's discretion. Many of these decisions, if you cannot make them for certain now, you can provide in the trust that the trustee has the discretion to do it, and then the trustee uses his or her best judgment in deciding whether or not additional funds should be distributed, which could be based on quality of care, amount of money in the trust, and so forth. All right, next thing. This is a thing that the lawyer will handle. You wouldn't want to worry about it, but I need to mention it to you. And that is the trust needs to comply with this very archaic rule that still about half the states have. That's called the rule against perpetuity. And what it does is it limits duration of trusts. Now for dogs, it does not matter because they're not going to outlive the rule against perpetuity's time period, which is traditionally 21 or more years. However, parrots can. They can easily outlive a state's duration of trust limitation period. So Your lawyer will either draft the trust carefully to avoid this type of problem. Maybe you are in one of the states where this rule no longer applies and you don't have to worry about it. Or what your lawyer might do is say, man, we can't do it in our state because we'll have problems, but we can create the trust under the law of another state. It is very common when you create trusts, not just for pets, but for lots of reasons. You create them in other states that have benefits like lower taxes on trust income or no taxes on trust income, or they have better protection against creditors, these types of things. So your lawyer will take care of that. But I'm just letting you know that they need to comply with it. And if they tell you, well, we need to create this under the law of South Dakota or Nevada, you'll know, oh, they're doing that because those laws are better than the laws in my state for pet trusts. Next thing, you have to designate a remainder beneficiary, meaning you have to designate someone who gets the property when the trust ends, because the trust is eventually going to end because the animal will pass away. And when the trust ends, you need to know where the property goes. Now, the one thing you don't want to do, never ever name the caregiver as the person who gets the money in the trust when the animal dies. I mean, nothing like giving a caregiver an incentive to terminate that animal than saying they get all the money when the animal dies. I mean, that is not an incentive you want to give the caregiver, because the caregiver obviously couldn't do it on purpose that it would see, but the animal would have an accident. Oh, not my fault, but you know that the caregiver might have done that to get the money from the trust. All right. So yes, of course, Eric, Phoenix Landing would never do anything to terminate a parrot. Come on now. That's why they're there. All right. By the way, I need to tell you, I have visited not many parrot places, but I visited a lot of different organizations, places that they have for rehoming animals or long-term care facilities for animals, etc. Phoenix Landing is just awesome. So you should be very impressed. I would not be lecturing for an organization that I did not think did a stellar job. I've been working with, I looked at my records. I think it's been 14 years that I've had interactions with people at Phoenix Landing, and I have been extremely impressed. So please don't worry about Phoenix Landing. All right. And like I said, the remainder should be maybe a charity which benefits the same type of animal. I'm sure Phoenix Landing would be very pleased to be a remainder beneficiary of your pet trusts. Now, the next thing you need to do is you need to identify and prevent fraud. You need to do something, because otherwise, if something were to happen to the animal, the caregiver will not want to get off the gravy train of getting money. And there have been cases where caregivers of pet trusts keep getting new animals to keep the pet trust going. There's a documented case where the pet was a black cat, and the caregiver was on the third cat getting benefits, because the trustee didn't notice that that cat's living an awful long time. So you want to have some sort of special identifying marks. Microchip is the best one. In fact, if the picture on the far right of the slide in that tube, that is a microchip. So that's good. You can do DNA, maybe a band. Of course, they could always cut off the band. Tattoos are, they're kind of, I wouldn't want to be tattooed, and I don't know if your bird would be, though it is common, with dogs and cats and, cows. Though I don't know many people who keep cows for pets, but they keep pot-bellied pigs. Anyways, so be sure you do something so that the trustee can make certain that the animal is actually the same animal that you left to the trust. Next thing, and this is of extreme importance, require the trustee to inspect the animal on a regular basis. I mean, you just can't have the trustee sending money. You got to have the trustee physically go show up and check out the bird's home. And you don't have announced visits. I mean, if you tell them you're coming, they're going to clean up the bird, give the bird a little food, groom them, give them parrot down or whatever you do to make parrots look happy and everything. I'm just making that up. Don't get mad at me. I don't know if you give parrots downers. I don't know. But you don't want anything like that to happen. So you want the trustee just to show up every once in a while and knock at the door and say, hey, let's take a look at the bird. And then you walk in and you look at the condition of the house, you look at the birds, you look at the cages, you look to see how everything is. So the trustee knows that the bird is actually being well taken care of. And of course, since the caregiver beneficiary does not own the bird, it's the trust that has it. If the bird is not being well taken care of, the trustee right then just takes the bird with the trustee and goes to the next caregiver. All right. So it is extremely important because you want to be sure that there's no abuse going on. I once read, it wasn't with parrots, it was with cats. And this person was running a place where they did long-term care for cats, and they got raided and they found out the cats were living in the absolute most squalid conditions possible. I think the newspaper article referred to it as what was the word they used? I can't remember. It was like a concentration camp. That was it. That's what they said it was like for the cats. So you don't want that to happen. You want to be sure that the trustee makes regular, unannounced, at-home visits to be sure that animal is well being taken care of. All right. The next thing we want to look at, which is actually the last thing, it's kind of appropriate because it's number 13, and that is you want to provide instructions for the final disposition. What do you want? Do you want it to go into a pet cemetery, make Stephen King proud? Do you want a cremation? Do you want a memorial site on the internet? What type of arrangement do you want? It's better to provide that instructions in the pet trust because then the trustee and the caregiver know what you would like to have done. Otherwise, they'll sit around and say, well, I don't know what they would like. So I know that's depressing to think about, of course. But if you provide for it, it will certainly make it much easier for the trustee. All right. Now, there are some other options. We've gone through these 13 different things for a pet trust. Hopefully this has put you in an idea of what you need to do, but there are some other options. They're not as good, but they are other options to consider. One is just an outright gift of the animal and money. Forget the trust thing and just say, I leave my bird and $5,000 to X. It's simple. It's very uncomplicated, but there's no enforcement. No enforcement, no guarantee, but it is very easy and very cheap. And it's still better than nothing, right? It's still better than nothing. An outright gift of the animal and property to someone to take care of it, but there's no guarantee. Another thing you can do is transfer to a life care center, a place that will keep the animal like forever. There's actually places I've seen that will take care of farm animals. You can leave your horse and your cows there and they'll take care of them. They usually require a significant endowment and you got to have due diligence because the facilities need to be good. Well, we're getting down to we've only got about 9 minutes left of our time together, and I want to have time for questions and answers. But before we do so, I want to share with you two interesting situations to show how parrots can protect you and so that you should protect them. The first is this situation. Now, this is not the real picture of the bird involved. Yes, it was a white-crested cockatoo as in the picture, but it isn't it. And the bird's name was actually Bird, named after the famous basketball player Larry Bird. And what happened here, it was Christmas Eve of 2001 in Pleasant Grove, Texas, where something very unpleasant happened. Two men broke into Stephen Butler's home to rob him and beat him up because they had some sort of ongoing feud. The bird flew in, tried to stop them, and these evil people, they beat Kevin and they beat Bird the bird and ended up killing both of them. However, before Bird died, he had bitten the murderer, and they were able to use the DNA from the skin in the bird's mouth to identify the robber, the murderer. They used that DNA evidence to convict him of capital murder and sentenced him to prison for life. So although Bird lost his life, at least he did bring a killer to justice. Our final one, which has a more happy ending. This is a picture of the actual bird involved in the case, whose name was Peanut. And it was in October of 2007, and that Shannon and his son, they were watching TV in the living room. And as people do when they watch TV, they fell asleep. And then they awoke at 3 a.m. when their Amazon parrot, whose name was Peanut, was imitating the fire alarm. Now, they couldn't hear the fire alarm from where they were, the smoke detector. They couldn't hear it from where they were in the living room, but they could hear Peanut imitating the fire alarm, which alerted them to the fire. The family got out. The parrot got out. Happy ending. Everybody was safe just because of the parrot there. So parrots can do a lot to help us, and we should help them as well. All right. We now have, the way my clock says, 7 minutes. And so now let's take a look at some questions and answers that we have. All right. So how do we want to do this, Michelle?
Yeah, so great. So I know we had first, I know a couple people had asked some questions about Phoenix Landing. And of course, if you have adopted a bird from Phoenix Landing, we require the bird to come back from us. So you don't have to worry about finding that next home. That's why we're here, so that we can help get them through that succession of good homes. But yes, I know we can try to plow through some of these questions that, and thank you all for being engaged in having questions. I know another quick question that people have come up with too is, yes, we're recording this. I'm going to send that link out hopefully in a day or so. So if we go through some of the questions, someone said, okay, and I know some of these I think you have answered in the talk, but I know one that is probably on the minds of some folks is about how much money should someone leave to care for a bird over, say, who might live 50 years.
Okay. That's the way to do that is you have to sort of figure out how much money you spend in a year. Think about the amount of money you spend in a year to take care of the parrot. Multiply that by the parrot's life expectancy. Now you know how much in current dollars you would need to take care of the pet. Then you need to figure there may be unanticipated veterinarian expenses, so increase that a little bit. And then mathematically figure out how much money you would need to generate that income over time. An accountant might be able to help you with that if you need to figure it out.
Great. Someone else had a question about insurance policies, because we talked about the insurance policy, your life insurance policy, your pet trust could be a beneficiary. Is there a kind of insurance policy they should look for?
Any life insurance policy will do the job. If you have a life insurance policy on your life, you could name your pet trust as the beneficiary of all or any part of it as you want. I usually say that's one of the easiest ways to fund a pet trust, because whether you create it while you're alive or when you're dead, the time it really needs the money is after you die. The policy pays, and it's quick. They can get the money within a week usually. And so the money is there right away. Take care of the pet.
Great. Another question that came in was, what if you want the caregiver to be different depending on if it's a temporary disability or a final, death? Is that
Sure. Just put it in the document. No problem at all. You can specify. That's the beauty of the traditional pet trust, in that you could provide all kinds of direction. You can provide any instructions as long as they're not illegal or against public policy. So you can say, if it's a disability of this period of time or shorter, I want this person, but if it's longer, I want this. You can be as complex or as simple as you like.
Great. And then someone had a question just about, there was an organization that you named earlier and gave the letters for, about in looking for an estate planning attorney that would have maybe some experience with pet trusts. What organization was that again?
I've just chatted it in so people can see it. It's actec.org. That organization only has in it experienced estate planners. And so you could contact them and just say, do you have experience with pet trusts? And like I said, 20 years ago, I would have said to you, it'll be very rare and hard to find somebody. Not the case anymore.
Great. Someone else also had a question about, if they leave their birds to an organization like Phoenix Landing, how do they ensure that Phoenix Landing will be there in the future? That is something that Phoenix Landing grapples with all the time too. And it's one of the reasons why we also have an endowment for sustainability. And one thing, when people write to us asking for feedback on that, if you leave your bird, also if there's funds you want to leave to that endowment as well, to make sure that the organization is there into the future. That's one thing at least that we usually recommend.
Well, first of all, I am very impressed and pleased that you are developing an endowment. That is one of the best things possible to assure any type of organization prolonged life. But the way that I would answer the question is name an alternate. Either name an alternate, I leave to Phoenix Landing. However, if Phoenix Landing is not in existence when my bird dies or whenever it is, then it goes to some other organization, or provide a method, some sort of method for determining it, because it may be very difficult to figure out how to do it now, because we're talking so many years in the future, potentially with parrots and other types of birds. So you could provide a method of some sort. 5 veterinarians in the area that take care of birds get together and decide. You can provide, again, any way you want, but it's good to provide some sort of mechanism. Or you could just leave it up to the trustee's discretion. You can do that too.
It's a good tip as well. Just like we would with a person having backups. That's fantastic. Okay.
Now, it is amazing how similar pet trusts are to trusts for kids. The provisions are very, very similar in a lot of the things that you take into account.
Okay. So someone else had a question about if other things like 401ks could be used to fund the trust, a pet trust.
The answer is yes. Anything you can name a beneficiary of. So pension plan, 401k, IRA, bank accounts, anything that you can name a trust as a beneficiary of, which is virtually everything, you can name the pet trust as the beneficiary.
Fantastic. Great. Well, I realize we are at 2:30 Eastern time. So I know it's still 11:30 in Tucson where Gerry is. But I want to thank everyone again for attending and staying with us. And it just warms my heart that you all are thinking about your birds' futures, because you love them, you care about them, you're here planning for them, you want to make sure that they're taken care of. And that's why we wanted to offer this. And thank you, Gerry, too, for doing this amazing talk. I always love listening to you talk as well, because you do bring such humor and you bring all those stories that terrify us into saying, oh yes, I need to do that. I need to do that right now. So I hope you all go home inspired. And of course, you know, that first thing to do if you don't have a wallet card, do that before the end of the day. You know, make sure you have that in place in case, you know, something happens to you today or tomorrow. And then start taking those steps, reviewing those documents. I'm going to, again, we're going to upload the recording of this talk, and then we're also going to send out a link to the wonderful handout that Gerry put together for us. So that will be coming out in your email. And again, just thank you all again for participating, and thank you so much. Just complete gratitude and for you doing this for us today.